already a little bit ahead of the game. You're already ahead of the game, but if you haven't yet, if you could right click on your name and add where you're from and where you'll be going to see if we have anyone who's going to the same places. So for example, my name's Megan Fry. I would be going from Illinois to Paraguay. And then if you'd like, I'm not going to force you to do this, but if you'd like to share in the chat one thing that you're looking forward to doing, trying, or seeing during your exchange. I always like seeing what people say. See if you've got anything in common with any of the other participants. Trying to think of something that I really wanted to do on my time abroad. I'm a language nerd, so I really liked just learning Spanish. Architecture, modern and traditional. Japan, I feel like is going to be amazing for that. That will be incredible for you. So we have two going to Japan and one going to Argentina, neighbors with Paraguay. Wonderful. You can feel free to send some more stuff in. Amanda, you want to just go ahead for now? Okay, so now we'll get into the meat of our presentation. So first, why do we go abroad? So an important first step for any student who's planning on going on an exchange is to think about your motivations for deciding to study abroad. So what is your why for applying for AFS? And you probably have multiple. So some motivations are more like the first bullet point. They're more about experience, learning about a new place, maybe meeting new people, experiencing a new culture. Maybe you want to improve a language that you're already learning, or you want to learn a new one, something you've never tried before. Maybe you have motivations that are more about understanding yourself better. So, a study abroad experience also gives you a great opportunity to examine your own personal values, beliefs, and experiences. Or maybe your aims to make some personal growth. The exchange experience involves a high level of independence. And while you're living and experiencing in a new culture, you're going to develop new perspectives and new ways of viewing yourself, others, and even the world. So, this is going to help you when you come back from your exchange. You're going to have a lot more newfound confidence, awareness, and independence. So, health and safety, probably what everyone thinks of as the most boring part, but the most important as well. So the one thing you're going to hear throughout this entire seminar is do your research. You are your number one resource. No matter who else is there, no matter where you are, you've always got yourself to rely on. So making sure you're prepared is really important. Um, with AFS, we also do have an established network of trained volunteers and staff worldwide, and they're prepared to help you get you support on your program. But the process is also about equipping you, the exchange student, with resources and tools to take care of your own health. So that's what we're going to be talking about throughout most of this presentation. So first of all, you should be reviewing your existing pool of resources. You probably have some as an LGBT person in the US already. We're also going to share some at the end, but you can do stuff like reading blogs. Sometimes Peace Corps volunteers or previous exchange students write blogs about their experience. You can check YouTube to see if anyone's made a video or some sort of documentary about living in your host country. If your host school here or your school here in the US or your community here in the US has some sort of expat group or study abroad group, you could see if they've got any resources or advice for you. You can also try looking online for a community, places like Facebook. Not sure what everyone's using now, TikTok maybe. Um, if you can find like-minded individuals via those programs that you can talk to and share your experience with, that can be very helpful, especially if you find that later on down the line, you're not able to share as much of yourself as you like in your host community. So part of doing your research is looking into local customs, laws, and norms. So, for example, local laws. It's important to do research on the laws where you're going to be going, whether that's maybe a state or provincial law or a countrywide law or something very specific just to your host city. So do remember, you should be looking up to see if LGBTQ protections exist in your host country, but even if they do, it might not translate across the entire country. So if you think about the US, for example, in the US, we do have legal gay marriage across the whole country, but if you go to different parts and different communities in the US, you'll find varying degrees of acceptance. And that's going to be the same for your host country as well. You're going to find some places, you may be near some place that's big and urban and has more diversity, or maybe you're going to have somewhere where you really have to focus on your own identity. Um, so knowing kind of what to expect locally and knowing that just because something's legal doesn't mean it's culturally accepted. Another part of that to think about is cultural norms. So stuff like hand holding, or if you're linking arms or eye contact, that's another important thing to research. And that's not just for LGBTQ students, that's for everyone to know how your local host community and culture will work. So, for example, in like India and Egypt, it's okay for male students to be holding hands and linking arms with other, and that doesn't mean there culturally that they're in a relationship. However, in other societies, it's not okay for any teenagers at all to be touching or showing any sort of affection in public, sorry. So you should be mindful of this, just so you don't accidentally offend anyone or put yourself in an uncomfortable situation. So before you go on program, you should probably think about some of your health and safety needs while you're abroad. So you are the person who knows yourself best. Think about what you know about yourself, what you've learned about yourself so far. And if you do know of any resources or anything that you think will help you abroad, write those down. So maybe that's just a list of coping mechanisms. Or maybe as you're thinking through this and thinking through your identity, maybe you think, wow, I'm going to need more hands-on support. So if you are unsure about that or you want additional help, you can always talk to your participant support specialist. Amanda's going to talk about that later on, the chain of command and the support team while you're abroad and on your program. So we'll cover that more then, but that is also a resource available to you. And one of the last things, you should remember to be careful about what you share online and what you've already shared online. So your host family and your host friends may try and search you up even before you get there. As soon as they have your name, they may be looking you up on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, wherever you are. So it's important to take a moment, review what you've already posted, and delete or private any posts or accounts that you don't want others to see. Even if that's just an embarrassing, poem you wrote when you were 9 that you thought was so good back then that you had to post it. If you don't want someone to see it, it's a good idea to remove that well before you ever step foot in your host country. I know this is all sounding really scary, and I'm not saying any of this to scare you, I promise. And I do promise you can still have an amazing and fulfilling and rewarding year as or however long your program is. Just be careful. Remember, there's always some preparation to go abroad. No matter what you're doing, if it's a business trip, if it's a year abroad, if you're moving abroad, you should focus on those reasons. Why are you doing this exchange? The reasons we just talked about. So if you can prepare yourself and focus on that, that will help you a lot in the long run. Okay. So we're going to do a short activity. So there are no right or wrong answers to this. This is a what would you do? So imagine you've started your program, you've just arrived, and you're starting to attend school, and you find out your host family and your local community aren't as receptive or open to discussing topics surrounding the LGBTQIA community. So, as the student in that perspective, how would you respond, and what would be your strategies? If you want to talk on the mic, you're welcome to do so. Otherwise, if you'd rather send stuff in the chat, that's also totally fine.
We have one person in the chat that shared the comments. Understand that everyone grew up differently, but try to teach them to be more open to other cultures.
Yeah, that's very important to realize that your experience we don't all have unique experiences all the time. You probably share a lot of memories with a lot of people, but everyone's different. It's very important to remember. Melvin, I know that you went abroad as well. So if you have any strategies or anything, any way you'd react to this as well, we'd love to hear your opinion as too.
Well, I can say that I went on AFS a long, long, long time ago, and the world was quite different than it is now. But at the same time, there were a lot of similarities to many parts of the world. I went to Malaysia, and I was placed with a Muslim family and a very conservative family. So yeah, we this is exactly describing the environment in which I was placed. We didn't talk about this sort of topic. We we it was a taboo subject. Um, so I had to make a decision at the time that this is the environment I'm in, and I want to fit in. I want to enjoy this experience and learn about this culture and my host family. So I didn't see the need to bring it up, and it was not something that. And see, we're all different though, but for me, I didn't need for it to be something that we talked about. So I kept it to myself all year. And later on, of course, in life, I'm still in touch with my family. They are my second family, and I still go and visit them regularly. And of course, they're aware now because I've been married for a long time. And we never did really talk about it, but it's right there and it's obvious. But that's in some cultures, that's the best way to manage situations and concepts that are unfamiliar. Is everybody accepts that this is the deal, and we still care for each other and respect each other, and it all worked out.
Lovely. I love that. It's great to hear. You still had a wonderful year. You still have a great relationship and
Yes,
nothing, you still were able to cultivate that. And I was similar with
absolutely.
mine. I'd also decided not to come out until the very end of my year abroad for similar reasons. I just didn't
Hmm.
feel it was a necessary part of my identity. And I was in a Catholic culture. Um, for whoever's going to Argentina, you may consider that it may be very religious. Um, but my host sister, when I told her at the end of the year, she was very accepting, very fine. She knows my partner, um, who was also on exchange with me. So it is possible. It is possible to, have all of these wonderful experiences. I know many of your families are going to tell you not to fall in love with someone you meet on your exchange year.
I think for me, if I can add, one of the things that happened as a result, and this is where I think that the AFS experience can be very powerful, both for the students and for the host families, is that my host family got to know me, someone from another culture and the other side of the world. They loved me at the end of the year. I loved them. And we remained in contact. We have remained in contact since then. And therefore, it made it easy for them to grasp this subject of someone being gay, whereas before that was just a forbidden haram, as it's called, type of thing. But once they started learning about my life, and they're like, "Well, Melvin's our kid. We care about him, so we need to rethink our whole attitude about the subject of LGBTQ people." And I think that that's one of the most powerful things that can happen as a result of this exchange,
Hmm. Yes,
changing
activism.
attitudes.
Yes, changing attitudes and recognizing activism doesn't always mean loud.
That's
You can
right.
be an activist just by showing acceptance, by saying, "Yeah, I love this person who's gay." Even if you aren't yourself in part of the community, you can always say, "Yeah, my friend, my sister, my cousin, someone I care deeply about." A lot of those. That really helps. Thank you for sharing.
Exactly. Thank you.
Okay, I think we're ready to go on to the next one. Okay, so now we're getting into the meat. Your identity abroad. So I want to reiterate that your safety comes first. You should focus on settling into your host country first. It's already going to be a really big change. No matter how much you prep yourself for, you're going to be jet lagged. You're going to be probably speaking a new language. It will be a lot. So focus on just settling in first, kind of getting the lay of the land, learning a little bit about the local culture and expectations first. You may find in this process that there are some things that you didn't know from your research or that you hadn't considered before, and that may affect how you want to present yourself on program. So there are some things you should consider before your program comes on and before you step foot, and also something before you come out to anyone in your host country. So before you leave, you should consider, how is your identity here? How do you identify here? What is important to you here? And how might that change in program? So however you're comfortable identifying here to your community in the US, that should be your baseline. You don't want to overextend yourself and you don't want to risk putting yourself in any uncomfortable situations. So you might have to consider that based on the country that you have chosen to go to, or your host community specifically, that you may need to navigate how out you want to be. So, like Melvin was talking about, you may decide it's just not a great idea for me to come out right now. Maybe culturally, I just don't feel like I'm ready to deal with all of the cultural aspects around it. Or, we hope that you would never be in a dangerous situation, but don't put yourself in a dangerous situation as well. Always make sure you're considering everything first. And we'll talk about some strategies how to do that too. So you may find that if you're out here, you may not be able to be out abroad, which is always very frustrating. Or maybe you'll find the opposite way. Maybe you find that your community here isn't very accepting, but in your host community, everyone's much more open and accepting of it. And you've actually been able to share that experience of your identity for the first time in your life. So it's going to be very different. So, for example, like I said, Paraguay, I came out to a few friends and my host sister at the very end of the program, but I didn't come out to the general community at all. I did tell AFS, and AFS worked with me, but in the end, it wasn't something that I felt necessary to share with my entire host community. And this is going to be very personal and very dependent on where you are. So, what your answers to this question might be totally different from if you have a friend that you make on program, or even somebody, if you have like a local classmate who is also LGBTQIA. Your experience is going to be different from theirs. So, what should you consider before you come out on program? So, including the things we've talked about before, like the local context, not only the laws and attitudes are important, but also you should consider what is the language and the terms that you're able to use when you come out in your host country. So, for example, like terms may have different meanings in a different language, or there may be different terms, or you might find that the term you're using to identify in English doesn't exist in your host country's language. Or if it does exist, it may not be commonly understood. So, for example, I speak Spanish. In Paraguay, I found that there are general gender neutral pronouns such as ella, and there are ways to incorporate gender neutrality, but they are very uncommon in mainstream spaces. They're really only used and seen in LGBTQIA spaces and online. So that may be something you have to consider. If the term doesn't exist, how would you like to identify yourself? How are you comfortable with being identified? So you should always also test the waters first. That's always a great way to see kind of what attitudes may be without putting yourself in any sort of uncomfortable situation. So instead of saying, well, because I'm gay, I think, or I'm trans and I have experience, they're all very important things, but if you can ease your way into it, make sure that you've got the proper support system as well. And that's a lot better. So instead of those, you can try saying something like, oh, well, where I'm from in the US, gay people are very accepted. Or where I'm from, trans athletes compete in sports all the time and we've had no issues. See how the other person reacts to that. That can give you some clues to how you should go forward there. And then the last thing we want to mention for this is that it's important not to project your ideals onto a new culture. One of the things you're gonna hear all the time from AFS people is it's not bad, it's just different. Saying something like, well, your culture is bad because you don't accept gay people, that's gonna hinder your understanding of the culture. Every culture is different, and change may be happening in that culture, but it may be happening at a slower pace than you're used to or than the community wants. So it's important to kind of go into it with an open mind, say, just like you said before, everyone's had a different experience, everyone's had different upbringings. What can I learn from this culture? What can I learn from this situation instead? Amanda, did you have anything to add for this one?
No, I think it was just an echoing of this advice. I think one thing that would be helpful to know is that, um, you know, just because, you might be feeling very uncomfortable potentially with the degree to which you might be witnessing varying degrees of openness around the community. One of the things that we're going to talk about later on are some helpful strategies for where to go with those feelings. It's very natural to feel feelings of frustration and disappointment, fatigue. And one of the things that we want to talk about in this webinar is what are the things you can do with those emotions so that you're not keeping those emotions bottled in.
Yes, great. Yes, don't keep them bottled in. You will have a much more difficult year. Okay. So we'll talk about some support networks now. So you've probably identified some of your own support networks in the US, but when you go abroad, you should also identify your in-country support network. So AFS staff or volunteers, your host family, friends you make in the community, those can all be possibilities or people you want to incorporate into your support network. Your AFS program staff may also be able to help you ahead of time a little bit. They can help you recommend someone safe to speak with while you're on program. They could also connect you with either past or potential current students, if there are any, who are also going to the same host country as you. Or even if, like, for example, spoke with my program staff person when I was going abroad, and she connected me with past students, LGBTQ students who had gone to Paraguay, that they were able to speak with me. Um, and they can also help you prepare yourself to create that new support network while you're abroad. Um, and just because you're creating a new support network while you're abroad doesn't mean that you have to totally leave everybody in your support network in the US behind. It's totally okay to keep in touch with the support network that you have here in the US, especially if you know you're having a rough moment. We do just ask, make sure it's not interfering with your program or your adjustment into your host country. Remember, you are there to learn what it means to live like a local in your host community. And if you find that you're needing to talk to your support network too often, maybe a sign you just need to reflect and see if you need to get more in-country support. Um, the other thing we want to touch on, you may have other identities that are affecting your LGBTQ plus identity too. So if you can reflect on these identities and how they may affect your experience while you're abroad, that's a great thing to do to prepare yourself ahead of time. So for example, me as somebody who appears female in the LGBTQ community, I'm going to have a different experience than someone who is in the same community but presents male. Or if you're in here like partnered, multi-ethnic, if you're a person of color, all of those can also affect how you view yourself as an LGBTQ person. So while you're considering all of this, just remember, going back to the beginning, remember those reasons for wanting to study abroad. Balance those reasons that you're going abroad, that you're putting yourself into this whole new situation. Balance those with the expectations you have about being open in your community while you're on program. And remember, you're likely going to be the exchange student. There are a lot of communities. I was the exchange student in my high school, and it's not a bad identity to lead into. You can kind of explore that. What is it like to be an expat abroad? So you can always explore some of your other identities as well. Okay. Okay. I'm sure many of you are very familiar with allyship and what it means to be an ally to the community. I always think it's important that even if you're part of the community, it's important to remember that you need to be an ally to your fellow members of the LGBTQ community. So being an ally means being respectful and being mindful and never ever putting someone into a situation where they're going to be uncomfortable. So you never want to out someone or assume that they're going to be comfortable with how they identify in the US, being how they identify abroad. They should always be the one to make that decision, and they should always be the one to announce that themselves. Allies protect their peers, and as part of the community, you are an ally to all your peers in this community. And there are other things you can do, such as using inclusive language when speaking with others and getting to know them and avoiding making assumptions. So, for example, instead of saying, "Oh, hey, Megan, you have a boyfriend, right?" Going, "Oh, do you have a partner?" Or something like that. Instead of saying, then I have to explain, "Oh, no, I don't have a boyfriend, actually. My partner's non-binary." And instead of getting all of that, I can just say, "Yeah, I do have a partner. Thank you very much." Makes it much smoother, also much simpler, and it makes people feel included. Okay, I think we have another activity. So again, you can unmute yourselves if you want or put it in the chat. So when you are abroad, imagine you consider yourself an activist and you'd like to practice activism in a culturally appropriate way while on program. So how would you assess what is culturally appropriate in your community? How could ideas surrounding the concept of activism look like in a different context? And how do you ensure that you're promoting your health and safety needs first before your activism?
We have someone in the chat sharing. You assess what is culturally appropriate and consider potential consequences of your actions before acting carefully and considerately.
I like the word considerately, especially knowing this is your identity, this is part of who you are, but there are other people who might be affected too, and other people may have different levels of comfort than you or cultures. I know in the US, we're very loud about activism.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah.
I will also share one point that I have, and it's something that I observe a lot in my work at AFS, which is, the programs that we provide to people across the world. We do that with the AFS mission in mind. And the ultimate goal of our mission is to create a more just and peaceful world. And sometimes when we talk about topics like this, it can be difficult to talk about justice because we do understand that different parts of the world and even parts of our own country are in varying degrees of what people would view as just and unjust. And there are times when we see, even in our own country, moments of what we would think of as injustice. And what I like to remind myself and our students, and what I'd like to remind you here is when we look at what have been in our recent history across the world, some of the most important and memorable moments of societal changes towards justice, usually those changes happen from within, not from outside. And so I think that's something that we can all keep in mind when you prepare for your experience abroad. You're about to come in to a culture and a society. And I think a lot of the tips that Megan has been talking about is strategies for exploring that culture from within, testing those waters.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. Okay. I think we're good to move on.
So too. Okay, great. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some important things to keep in mind when we're thinking about sharing your identity and your preferences with AFS. So one thing that we would very much recommend all students do is to consider now, before you embark on your program, what you are comfortable sharing and not sharing ahead of time with your study abroad specialist. Again, Megan talked a lot in the early parts of this presentation about doing research. And yes, do your research. And then when you have questions or you have concerns or you have thoughts about what you want to share with those around you while you're on program, consider in advance how comfortable you are with sharing and not sharing ahead of time, and talk to your study abroad specialist about it. They are really resources available for you, and they will be able to help you navigate any questions or concerns you have in advance of your program starting. We work very hard at AFS to make sure that we are representing our students in a way that adequately and appropriately represents their identities. The more information we have about your preferences, your needs, your concerns, the better off we are as your study abroad organization to place you in a setting that is best suited to foster a meaningful, positive study abroad experience for you. So if you feel safe telling us, we would like you to share any information, questions, concerns you have ahead of time. And this way, your study abroad specialist can also help talk you through some of the cultural realities that could be at play and help you plan ahead and feel prepared. We really do want to work with you on an individual basis and help address any questions that you have or questions that you anticipate your host community having about things ranging from general identity expression, gender expression, to your name, if you have a preferred name that's different from your legal name, preferred pronouns, etc. We want to make sure that we're working together to find you the placement and the experience that really can help you make the most of your year abroad. So in general, if you look ahead and envision the whole time span of your program and the kind of identity expression that you really hope to be able to achieve during that time span, our strong recommendation is to talk to your study abroad specialist about that and name it now before your program begins, if you haven't yet had an opportunity to have that conversation with your study abroad specialist. So some things to consider when we think about the day-to-day realities of being abroad on an exchange program. And this is especially for members that identify as non-binary or trans. If there is a discrepancy between your legal name or your birth name and your preferred name, these are areas that your study abroad specialist will work with you on, especially as it pertains to things like visas, residence permits, etc. So US law requires AFS to use your legal names on things like official documents, like visas, etc. But in all other ways in which we interact with you, we will work to respect your preferred name. Also, in the event that your birth name might be difficult to pronounce for those in your host community, which does happen sometimes, you may be given the opportunity or the option to go by a different name or a nickname, and sometimes that can be the case too. So you might find that you have an opportunity to go by a preferred name or a different name. We would like to know your preferred pronouns before your program begins in order to help us make sure that we and our partners in your hosting organization are representing you to your level of comfort. And this way we can also make sure that this important information is shared accordingly with the people in your host community that will be supporting you immediately on your program. You may find, and I think Megan talked a little bit about this earlier on, you may find a reality that linguistically there is a lack of streamlined gender neutral pronouns in the dominant language of your host country or host community, or that gender neutral pronouns are part of a subculture, and that can be the reality sometimes. It's also the case sometimes that you may come across your host community might be very open-minded and open to embrace all types of diversity, of different types of identity, but the language that they use to describe the different facets of people's identity might be different than what you're used to at home. So the terminology that people might use might be different than what you're used to at home. So these are some realities that you might find yourself encountering and navigating and negotiating. And again, we really recommend you keep an open mind and approach it as a learning experience. Also, things like gendered spaces. So we acknowledge that American culture and society is such that I think people attending this webinar here may already have had some experiences in their lives having to negotiate gendered spaces in the US. So if so, it's good to think about strategies that you have already used in the US that you might already have in place. And what do those strategies look like for you? These are strategies that may work for you abroad. There may also be important differences. So, for example, we know that in a country like Japan, schools very often enforce gendered uniforms, similar to other parts of the world as well in some countries. So strategies may need to be tweaked a little bit and adapted according to the community that you are going to. Again, do your research, and if you have any questions or if you foresee experiencing any concern, talk to your study abroad specialist so that we can begin having those conversations in advance. Okay. So some additional things that we want to mention here that will be important to consider. If you are a student who is currently undergoing, starting, or completing, or have recently completed identity affirming medical care, it is important for AFS to know about that, again, so that we can ensure that we can provide you with a safe and meaningful experience abroad. In general, AFS needs to know about any major medical events that you receive within the months prior to coming on program. So even, for example, if you have surgery on your knee in the months prior to program, it's usually something that we want to know about in the event that anything carries over in terms of side effects or long-term effects on your program. So this is us needing to know recent medical history. Fielding questions on program. So any exchange student anywhere in the world will probably be the subject of curiosity by those around them. And this might be especially true for those that are out in the community. And so it is very possible that members of your host community may ask a lot of questions. And some of those questions may pertain to the community, and some may pertain to your identity as an American or something else. And what is, I think, important for you to remember is navigating experiences such as this and such as the other possible realities that we mentioned earlier with a learning-based approach. And essentially what that means is listening, paying attention, and bearing witness to your surroundings and things that are around you, such as questions that you might receive or reactions of people around you. Those are clues, and those are important pieces of information that you can use to shape your understanding of your surroundings. And they can help you start to navigate your surroundings on program, and they might lead to other questions too. Be curious. That's probably the most important thing, is to be curious. For example, one of the things that we experience a lot on program is the differences that can exist between individual and collective mindsets. So in the US, we are a very individualistic society, which means that most Americans, not all, we don't want to overgeneralize, but many Americans perceive their lives and themselves in according to the I, them. And when they perceive the world around them and when they go about their daily lives, we tend to think of our own identity according to our individual identity, the I. Whereas other parts of the world, people tend to orient themselves more along the lines of the we. And they see their identity as much more tied in with the group, the collective, the we. So even the concept of individualism is very different culture to culture. And so you might start to actually notice that and observe that being at play in some of the interactions that you have with people in your host community. And that's an example of what we would call a learning-based approach, because through those interactions and observations you make, that's when we begin to see real intercultural learning happen. So let's talk a lot here about self-care. AFS takes self-care very seriously. We know that being on program and on exchange can present challenges to anyone. And your health and your safety is our top priority. So if you think about your day-to-day life here in the US, you know that everyone, it's very normal to have good days and bad days. That's completely normal. We are human. Similarly, you will have naturally some down days as well as up days on exchange. That is also very normal. In addition, however, being on program, living in an entirely new context, adapting to that context can sometimes amplify the downs and the ups. You will be taking steps out of your comfort zone, and sometimes you will be taking huge leaps out of your comfort zone, and you will be working hard. Being on program can be very hard work. So you are the expert on you. You will always be the expert on how you are doing. And you are the expert on what helps you feel safe, feel grounded, and feel in equilibrium. So, for example, if you feel, especially after this conversation, that, maybe you might not be able to be as out on program as you are in the US, we recognize that over time, just how that must feel. And we understand that. And we take seriously your ability to have strategies that you can use to help you and to be able to practice and sustain those strategies throughout the course of your program. AFS can't tell you what strategies to use on program, and we can't dictate to you how to sustain those strategies while on program, but we do have a few recommendations. Number one, again, recognize yourself as the expert on what you need. Number two, take charge of your self-care. Don't wait for someone else to recommend it. Don't wait for someone else to say, I think you should get enough sleep every night, or keep a journal or go for a walk. Go for it. Three, we very much recommend keeping in mind not just one self-care strategy, but multiple strategies. Think of them as tools in your toolbox. And remember to keep your toolbox full. So have multiple self-care strategies, not just one. And the reason we say this is because we know that being in a different country and a different context may sometimes present obstacles to being able to practice a self-care strategy as you are accustomed to back home. And that can be another challenge. So for example, if back in the US, you're used to taking a walk or a jog around your neighborhood, you may be hosted in an area where that might not always be possible, or might not be possible after dark, for example. Or there was one case I worked on years ago where a student's self-care strategy was taking bubble baths, but they were placed in a home where there was no bathtub. So they had to rethink that strategy and adjust that strategy. So think of multiple tools and resources for self-care. So going to a cafe, making art, etc., getting enough sleep, taking that walk, doing other forms of exercise, etc. Think of what gives you that sense of groundedness, equilibrium, contentment, safety. And also, it's important to find a support network and allies. It's also important to identify common interests between you and your host community in order to truly expand your horizons and really celebrate and nurture all the things that make you who you are and all the things you want to explore while you're on program. This experience that you're about to embark on will have a time span, it will have an end, and you will go home. So work with your local resources, options, and supports to really make sure that you're well as taking advantage of the unique opportunities in your host communities. You might find new strategies available to you in your host community that you might not have realized or been able to practice back in the US. That would be cool. And another thing that's really important is don't wait. If you are on program and you begin to feel unusually low, and if you feel like after a couple of days you're really not able to get out of that low, talk to someone. And here's who you can talk to. So what you see in front of you is the AFS communication chain. It's the same protocol and chain at AFS-USA and across the AFS network. So this is a communication chain that everyone in the AFS network really encourages people to use. And it's essentially a model that AFS follows to ensure timely and comprehensive information sharing. Part of what makes AFS AFS is that we take the support of our students extremely seriously. And we know that there are multiple stakeholders involved in the AFS network. And so this is how we ensure a very quick and comprehensive flow of information so that people like your parents, people like your local volunteers are all informed of how you're doing, what's going on, and what's going to happen moving forward. So what you see at the very top is you, the student, and your host family. And hopefully your host family will be someone that you can share information with and talk to. And then also you'll see your local contact person. This is someone that you might refer to as your LC or your liaison. The term is a little different country to country. You will have a volunteer who is assigned as your primary point of contact, and that person is your go-to. You can talk to them about anything you want to, and you can reach out to them at any time you want to. Usually, your volunteer who is assigned as your primary point of contact will then, as needed, share information with other volunteers in your chapter that are responsible for reporting to staff in your host country. Staff in your host country share information with staff in your sending country, aka the United States. So someone like me will get information and then we'll report to your parents. So depending on the question or the concern that could be at play, sometimes it's something that can just be resolved through a simple conversation with your liaison. But if you have any more significant questions or concerns and something that perhaps we need to involve AFS staff with supporting, or even your parents with supporting, this is how we share that information. There's also a duty officer system at play, and you are very welcome to share or save this number on your phone because this is a 24/7 number that you can reach out to day or night. It is designed to respond to emergencies and urgent situations. So once you depart from your program, I know right now you're in touch with your study abroad specialist, but once you depart from your program, once you arrive in your host country, this is the communication protocol that we have set up for you. So again, we recommend utilizing your local point of contact as your volunteers, and you will be introduced to your local volunteers once you arrive. And there is in every single AFS partner country, there is a staff member like myself that is responsible for, responding to any questions and concerns that students may encounter. Remember to rely on this support network when you are in country. And remember to use this chain of communication when you are on program. And for your parents in the US, support staff at AFS-USA will be their primary points of contact should they have any questions or concerns. Okay, one last activity, and I know we're running low on time, but if you're able to stick around for a little longer, we have one more activity and a few additional slides for you. So this is another what would you do, and feel free to type your answer in the chat or use your mic. You are feeling, let's say, you are feeling a bit disconnected from your host community and feel like you are not able to be as out as much as you had hoped while on program. How do you respond to this? What are your self-care strategies to help you manage this? Who and what are your support networks? Take a minute to think about your response. This will be different for everyone. Any thoughts? I see someone has in the chat, utilize the support system you develop before and after arrival to make sure to always keep calm. Great strategy. Yeah. I'll also say, though, again, it's natural to have feelings of frustration sometimes, or feeling tired. And that's why these self-care strategies are also recommended. Right? Any other thoughts?
Okay, so we're not going to make you talk for this one. Do not worry. This is more of a resource. This is a reflection exercise. Something good. We will be sending this. I sent this in the chat just a minute ago, but we're going to be sending this whole PowerPoint to you, so you don't have to screenshot it right now. You'll have access to the slides. Um, but this is something, a great exercise if you feel like you're kind of panicking or you feel like you don't know where you are. Are you too far outside of your comfort zone? Are you just panicking totally? Good exercise to kind of ground yourself and go, okay, what are my options? How immediately do I need to take action? And then can I reach out and ask anyone anything? I think that's all we really had for this one. And then there is a resource list, and again, we'll be sending this to you. So we have stuff on our AFS website. There's a whole student help and learning that's not just specific to LGBTQ students. It's for everybody who's going abroad. I will say on the help and learning site for students, if you have to look under your specific country you're going to for the LGBTQ resources. So if you're going to Japan, go click find the Japan specific resources. You'll find it there. Argentina, same thing, anywhere you're going. And then lots of others. And this is just a starter list. You are definitely encouraged to develop this as far as you wish, as far as will be helpful to you, and share them with each other. Don't guard your resources, share them with your peers. It's always good to have someone else in your corner. Okay. Are there any questions? Anybody have anything we can help clarify? Or I'm open to talking about my own experience too. I know there's not many of you going to Latin America, but if you'd like, any general questions, anything goes. Either in the chat or if you want to unmute yourself.
Um, I I apologize. I wasn't here for the first 15 minutes.
Okay.
Could you briefly explain to me what was discussed earlier?
So earlier we talked a lot about how it might look for you as a student being on program. Let's see. So we talked about why we're going abroad, focusing on your reasons why you're going abroad. Why have you applied to AFS? And these are questions to ask yourself. Um, we focused on some health and safety, and we'll send you the slides to you so you can kind of look through it.
Oh,
Making
okay.
sure that you're putting your health and safety first is the key thing. Do your research and make sure you're focusing on your own health and safety are the two biggest things that we've kind of talked about.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah,
Apologies.
no, that's totally fine. Glad you were able to join us. Anyone else have any questions? Even if it's just more general, it doesn't have to be LGBTQ specific. It's okay if it's a general question. No? Everybody feeling good? Yeah? Feel prepared to go on your exchange years? I just keep saying year. Semester, year, summer, your exchange programs. Yeah? Good? Okay.
And again, we'll share these slides, and either now or if tomorrow or next week, any questions at all come up, remember to reach out to your study abroad specialist. They are resources for you to help you prepare.
They don't bite, I promise. I talked to mine multiple times. She was always very nice and very lovely and never said anything mean to me. I promise, no matter how silly your question may be that you think it is, it's not. Someone's asked a sillier question. Okay. That is, I think, all we have for tonight. So thank you all so much for joining us. Hope this has at least helped you prepare yourselves or